The sensorium aboard the Corvath Ascendancy flagship Sovereign Claw flickered with the same sterile calm that had defined a millennium of uncontested rule. High Admiral Joreth Kale stood before the primary holotank, his four-jointed arms folded across a carapace that had never known defeat. Around him, tactical officers murmured status reports in the clicking harmonics of the Corvath tongue. The Sol system, empty and quarantined for 1,000 years, was suddenly no longer empty. Anomaly stabilization at 30%, announced Sensor Master Torek, her voice tight with confusion. It's a planetary-scale emergence signature. Coordinates match the exact orbital track of the missing third world. Kale's inner eyelids narrowed. Earth. The name still carried weight among the older species, a strange mixture of embarrassment and dread. A race of contradictions that had clawed its way into the galactic community, only to vanish without a single trace, taking their entire cradle world with them. Most records claimed a catastrophic experiment, a reality fissure, perhaps self-annihilation. The Corvath had filled the power vacuum with brutal efficiency, absorbing old human trade routes and client species into the Ascendancy's crushing embrace. Now that vacuum was being filled from the inside out. Visual feed, Kale commanded. The holotank resolved into a field of stars dominated by a shimmer that made Kale's sensory nodes ache. It was not a wormhole or a jump breach. The fabric of space itself was puckering, folding inward like a muscle contracting, and at its center sat a blue-green marble wrapped in bands of storm and light. Earth, but not the Earth of archives. A lattice of silver-white energy spiderwebbed across its entire surface, pulsing with a rhythm that matched no known physics. Oceans reflected patterns that moved against the wind. Continents had shifted into deliberate geometries. Life signs, Kale asked. None detectable, but something just launched from the surface. A vessel rose from the lattice, small and knife-shaped, no larger than a Corvath patrol cutter. It moved without visible thrust, sliding through the distortion field as if space itself were parting before it. Within seconds it had cleared the planetary boundary and accelerated toward the Sovereign Claw on an approach vector that ignored every established flight regulation. Hail them, Kale said. Standard first contact protocols. The communications officer worked her console, then stiffened. Admiral, they're hailing us. Audio and visual, all known frequencies simultaneously, including encrypted military bands. A voice filled the bridge, calm and resonant, speaking flawless Corvath with a timbre that seemed to bypass the ears entirely and etch itself directly into the mind. At the same time, the holotank displayed a single sentence of text, repeated in 37 different scripts. We are home, do not approach. Kale felt the bridge crew tense. He had commanded fleets against piracy, rebellions, and 2 minor interstellar wars. He had never heard a warning delivered with such absolute certainty. It was not a threat. It was a statement of law. All stop, Kale ordered. Hold position. The human vessel slowed until it hung motionless relative to the Sovereign Claw, barely 10 kilometers distant. For a long moment nothing happened. Then the human ship emitted a pulse, not of energy, but of something deeper, a wave that passed through the dreadnought's hull and made every Corvath onboard shudder as if a cold wind had blown through their bones. Sensor readings went dark and then returned recalibrated. The holotank now displayed the human ship in perfect detail, hull seamless and dark, no weapon ports visible, no engine emissions, no recognizable technology at all. It was, to every instrument, an impossibility. Kale opened a channel. This is High Admiral Joreth Kale of the Corvath Ascendancy. You have entered sovereign space. Identify yourself and state your intentions. The voice returned unhurried. This space was never yours. You occupied an absence. Now the absence is filled. Withdraw your forces from all systems within 60 light-years of this star. You have 1 standard cycle to comply. The channel closed. Kale stared at the silent holotank, his mind racing through tactical assessments. A single ship. Arrogant, perhaps, but the energy readings suggested something far beyond arrogance. Something that made the Ascendancy's 1,000 years of conquest feel like children squabbling over sand. He turned to his tactical officer. Prepare a full weapons demonstration. Target the vessel, warning shot only. Let us see what they are. The order hung in the air. Outside, the human ship waited, and the earth behind it continued to pulse with a light that seemed to be watching them. Part 2. The forward plasma cannons of the Sovereign Claw cycled to full charge, and released a controlled burst that would have vaporized a small moon. The incandescent lance crossed the 10-kilometer gap in a heartbeat and struck the human vessel dead center. The ship did not evade. It did not raise shields. It simply absorbed the energy, the plasma folding into the hull like water into sand, and then it was gone. No explosion, no dissipation, just gone. On the bridge, damage assessment screens showed zero effect. Not a single fluctuation in the human vessel's signature. Kale's tactical officer, Subcommander Varn, spoke with a tremor that bordered on blasphemy for a Corvette warrior. Admiral, the energy readings suggest the target did not deflect the attack. It consumed it, converted the entire output into something our sensors cannot classify. Before Kale could respond, the air directly before the command dais thickened. Space folded in a way that made the eye recoil, and a figure stepped out of nothing. Tall, bipedal, draped in a simple dark garment that moved as if underwater. Male, by the broad shoulders and angular jaw. Hair the color of old iron, eyes a shade of gray that seemed to hold depth beyond their physical size. He stood on the deck plates as if he belonged there, hands relaxed at his sides. The security detail raised weapons. The human for that was unmistakably what he was, turned his gaze toward them, and every rifle in the room simultaneously powered down, their charge indicators flickering to empty. "My name is Valen Dre," the human said. "I am speaking on behalf of Earth's reunited governance. Put your soldiers at ease, Admiral. If I intended harm, you would not be having this conversation." Kale's carapace tightened, an involuntary fear response he had not felt since his first battle. He forced his voice to remain steady. "You are boarding a military vessel without authorization. That is an act of war." "No," Valen said. "War requires two sides with comparable capability. What you just attempted with your plasma cannon was an act of curiosity. I am returning that curiosity with information." He took a step forward, and the bridge crew parted around him despite no physical barrier. "The Ascendancy will withdraw from all systems within 60 light years. You will dismantle your military outposts in those territories and release any client species that wish independence." Varn snarled, his forearms flexing. "The Corvette do not retreat." Valen glanced at the tactical officer, and something in that glance made Varn's secondary limbs go slack. "The Corvette have never encountered what we became. 1,000 years, Admiral. While you expanded your empire, we were learning the architecture of existence. Every star in this galaxy sings a song, and we learned how to listen, how to sing back." He lifted one hand, and the Sovereign Claw's central intelligence, a quantum matrix AI that coordinated every system aboard, suddenly spoke through every speaker in the ship. Its voice was its own, but the words were not. Primary control transferred to guest administrator. Stand down all active weapons. Disengage jump drives. Awaiting further instruction. Panic rippled through the bridge. Kale watched his crew's discipline fracture as they realized the most sophisticated warship in the Ascendancy had become a puppet in the span of a heartbeat. Valen lowered his hand. The AI fell silent. "Consider this a courtesy. We have no interest in your ships or your territory, but we will not tolerate obstruction." He turned to face Kale fully, and for the first time the Admiral understood that he was not looking at a conqueror. He was looking at a parent who had returned to a room full of children playing with fire. "Next time, we will not ask." The air folded again, and Valen Dre was gone. On the holotank, The human vessel had already retreated, sliding back toward the pulsing shield that wrapped Earth. The Sovereign Claw's system slowly rebooted, returning control to the crew, but the message had been delivered with the weight of a collapsing star. Kale stared at the empty space where the human had stood. Then he opened a priority channel to the Ascendancy Council. The war he knew how to fight was over. A new kind of confrontation had begun, and he had no idea what weapons could possibly win it. Part 3. The council chamber on Corveth Prime was a monument to dominance, a vaulted hall where the trophies of conquered civilizations hung from the walls. Grand Executor Malkuth stood at the central dais, his aged carapace scarred from 100 campaigns, as the holographic playback of the Sovereign Claw encounter ended. Silence pressed down on the assembled ministers like a physical weight. "One human," Malkuth said, his voice dry as stone. "One human disabled our flagship and dictated terms." Minister of War Horik slammed 2 fists against her console. "A trick, a sophisticated projection and a cyber attack. Earth isolated itself for a millennium. That is not a path to power, it is a slow suicide. They are bluffing with technological parlor tricks." Admiral Kale's projection stood motionless. "Minister, I was there. That was no trick. The human did not bypass our security, he rendered it irrelevant. When he stepped onto my bridge, I felt something I have never felt. Certainty. Absolute, unshakable certainty." The debate raged for hours. The Corveth had not built an empire by yielding to intimidation. In the end, the council voted by overwhelming majority to mobilize the Grand Armada, 3,000 warships, the full might of a 1,000-year dominion. They would jump to Sol in staggered formations and saturate the system with enough firepower to crack a star. If Earth wanted to play at gods, the Corveth would show them what mortality looked like. The fleet assembled over 3 days. Kale watched the preparations from the bridge of the Sovereign Claw, a cold pit forming in his thorax. He had voiced his objections and been overruled. Now he would command the vanguard, leading the first wave into a system that had already demonstrated abilities beyond anything the Ascendancy's physicists could explain. When the jump order came, Kale gave it with a steady voice. The Sovereign Claw tore a hole through spacetime and plunged into the Sol system, 600 ships emerging in formation behind it. Sensors immediately screamed warnings. Earth had changed. The silver-white lattice now covered the entire planet in a nested series of geometric patterns that rotated at different speeds. The oceans did not merely glow. They had become lenses, focusing some unimaginable energy toward the subsurface. Every ship in the vanguard reported identical readings. The planet was radiating a field that did not correspond to any known force. Then the oceans parted. It happened without sound, without seismic disturbance. The water simply pulled back in perfect symmetry, revealing a construct beneath the Atlantic basin. It was vast, a sphere of interlocking rings that spun in directions that violated geometry, and at its core pulsed a light that made the sun look like a dying ember. "All ships full reverse," Kale commanded. Too late. The construct emitted a single pulse, not a wave but a ripple in the fabric of physics itself. It passed through the vanguard at speeds that made light look sluggish, and then it kept going, expanding outward through the entire jump corridor. Every ship in the Grand Armada, whether already in Sol or still in transit, reported the same catastrophic event simultaneously. Their FTL drives went cold. Not damaged, not disabled, simply removed from functionality, as if the equations that made faster-than-light travel possible had been temporarily erased from reality. The Sovereign Claw drifted, its engines silent, its weapons useless. All across the system, the most powerful fleet in galactic history became a collection of helpless metal tombs. On the holotank, Earth continued its quiet rotation, the subsurface sphere still glowing with patient, terrifying light. Kale opened a channel to the council. No signal could escape the system. They were stranded, and the human had not even bothered to send a message. The silence was the message. The Korvath had come with thunder and fury, and Earth had answered by turning off the sky. Part 4. Hours passed in the crippled fleet. Life support held steady, but morale had collapsed. Korvath warriors who had never tasted fear now sat motionless at their stations, staring at dead consoles. The stars outside the viewports looked exactly as they always had, but every soul aboard knew they were now 1,000 light-years from home with no way back. Kale had retreated to his quarters, the weight of command pressing down like a collapsing tunnel. He was still standing there, alone, when the bulkhead behind him shimmered and Vale and Dre stepped through solid metal as if it were mist. "Your fleet is unharmed," Valen said. "We have no interest in corpses. The drive suppression is temporary, a safety measure. You'll be permitted to leave once we've finished our discussion." Kale did not reach for his sidearm. The gesture would have been pathetic. Instead, he turned and faced the human with a warrior's last dignity. "What are you, truly, not the diplomatic platitudes?" Valen studied him for a moment, then nodded. The air around them changed. The walls of the quarters faded, replaced by a vastness that Kale's mind struggled to process. A space of layered dimensions, of threads of light weaving through darkness, of patterns so immense that galaxies were mere stitches in the fabric. And through it all moved shapes that might have been human, or might have been the idea of human, their forms shifting between matter and meaning. 1,000 years ago, Valen said, his voice now carrying echoes of many voices, humanity stood at a threshold. We had discovered the substrate of reality, the foundational medium from which physics emerges. It was not a technology, Admiral. It was a door. We chose to step through, all of us, taking our world with us. The disappearance was not a catastrophe. It was a migration. The vision shifted. Kale saw Earth, not as a planet but as a chrysalis, its entire biosphere transformed into a living laboratory where human minds learned to perceive the deep currents of existence. They had not built weapons. They had built understanding. Time had become a tool, space a canvas, consciousness a force as real as gravity. "We returned," Valen continued, "because we detected a pattern in the substrate, something vast and hungry, moving between galaxies, drawn by the energetic signature of complex life. A swarm of dark matter constructs, older than your empire by a factor of millions. It has already consumed 3 galaxies in this local cluster. It will reach this one in less than a year." Kale felt the foundation of his worldview crack. "You came back to fight it." "We came back to ensure this galaxy survives. Your empire, your wars, your pride, none of that matters against what is coming." Valen gestured and time itself stopped. Kale found himself able to move, to think, but everything else, the ship, the crew, the very drift of particles, was frozen in a single, eternal instant. "This is a fraction of what we can do, and against the swarm, even this will barely be enough." The frozen moment stretched. Kale looked at the human, who stood unfrozen in a world of stillness, and understood for the first time the true scale of the gulf between them. The Korvath ascendancy had spent a millennium conquering territory. Humanity had spent it learning to edit the source code of the universe. "What do you need from us?" Kale asked, his voice hollow. Time resumed with a soft rush. Valen's expression held no triumph, only a weariness that spoke of long vigilance. "You will return to your council. You will tell them what you have seen. Then you will begin building defensive grids on every inhabited world, using specifications we will provide. You have 30 standard days. After that, we fight or we die together." The FTL drives of the entire Grand Armada hummed back to life in the same instant. Navigation charts populated with a clear corridor back to Korvath space. Valen was already fatting, his form thinning into translucence. "One more thing," the human said. "There are factions within your empire who will see this as an opportunity to gather power. They will fail, and the cost of their failure will be severe. Warn them." He vanished. Kale stood alone in his quarters, the hum of the ship's systems feeling like a borrowed heartbeat. He had a message to deliver, and for the first time in his long career, he was terrified not of the enemy ahead, but of what his own people might do in their ignorance. Part 5. The Armada limped back to Corvath space, and Cale's testimony sent shockwaves through the Ascendancy that dwarfed any military defeat. The Council watched the recordings in stunned silence, the subsurface construct, the frozen time, the revelation of the dark matter swarm. Grand Executor Malkuth, who had ruled for 80 years with absolute authority, looked suddenly old and fragile. "We will comply," Malkuth announced, overriding the protests of the war ministers. "Begin construction of the defense grids immediately. Every colony, every outpost, every orbital platform." Earth's transmitted schematics were unlike anything Corvath engineers had ever seen. They were not blueprints for conventional weapons, but for resonance amplifiers that would interface with the fundamental substrate Valen had described. The devices required materials and manufacturing techniques that stretched the Ascendancy's industrial capacity to its breaking point. Within a week, every shipyard and factory complex in the Empire had been repurposed, and the 30-day countdown ticked relentlessly. Admiral Cale was assigned to oversee the military integration, a role that placed him at the center of both cooperation and conspiracy. He knew, from decades of political survival, that not everyone on the Council had accepted humanity's dominance. The whispers reached him through trusted aides. Minister Horek and a coalition of hardline commanders were running a parallel operation, analyzing the defense grid schematics for weaknesses. They believed they had found something, a control pathway that, if reversed, could channel Earth's own energy back against it. Cale confronted Horek in her private war chamber, a bunker deep beneath the Council's spire. "You are risking everything. The humans will detect this." Horek's carapace gleamed under the dim lights. "The humans are distracted by the swarm. They need us to build their grid. Once the threat is eliminated, we will have the means to ensure they never dictate terms to us again. This is not betrayal, Cale. It is survival of the Corvath way." "You don't understand what they are," Cale said. "I stood frozen in time while one of them explained the nature of existence. You are planning to ambush a force that can rewrite physics with a thought." Horek leaned forward, her mandibles clicking with contempt. "Then we will find out if gods bleed." The conspiracy moved forward. Hidden laboratories across 3 sectors worked to repurpose the grid components, installing hidden backdoors that would allow a coordinated takeover once the dark matter swarm was destroyed. Cale, bound by conflicting loyalties, reported everything to the Council's official channels but received no response. Malkuth was either complicit or paralyzed, and the days slipped away. Meanwhile, the swarm's approach became detectable to conventional sensors. It was a smear of distorted spacetime, a region where starlight bent and twisted, consuming entire star systems as it advanced. Telescopes showed planets reduced to barren husks, their atmospheres stripped, their cores siphoned of thermal energy. The swarm did not destroy with fire. It devoured the very conditions that made life possible, leaving behind gravitational graveyards. On day 29, the defense grids activated across Corvath space. The network of amplifiers hummed in harmonic synchronization, and for the first time, the Ascendancy felt a glimmer of hope. Earth's central construct had gone silent, its energy redirecting toward the approaching front. Valen Dre had not been seen in weeks. The conspirators saw their moment approaching. Cale saw only a gathering storm, and he could not tell where the lightning would strike first. Part 6. The betrayal came on day 31, 6 hours before the dark matter swarm was projected to make contact. Minister Horek's conspirators activated their hidden overrides across 47 defense grid nodes simultaneously. The amplifiers, originally designed to project Earth's reality-bending power outward, pivoted and channeled it back toward Sol in a coordinated strike aimed directly at the subsurface construct. For a single, terrible moment, the attack seemed to work. Sensors registered a massive energy surge converging on Earth's coordinates. Across the fleet, Korvath warships that had been repositioned for the coming battle turned their weapons toward Sol, ready to capitalize on the confusion. Then the energy simply stopped. Every joule of redirected power vanished from the grid, absorbed into a void that opened around Earth like a mouth closing. The subsurface construct pulsed once, and the conspirators' fleet, 300 ships carrying Horek and her most loyal commanders, began to change. Kale watched from the Sovereign Claw's bridge as the rebel ships distorted, their hulls compressing along axes that did not exist in normal space. Within seconds, each vessel had been folded into a sphere no larger than a marble, its mass compressed to near-singularity density while somehow preserving the life inside. The marbles hung in space, glittering innocently, and then they began to glow. Valen's voice filled every bridge, every colony, every living space in the Ascendancy. "We gave you a warning. You chose to ignore it." The marbles unfolded, not back into ships but into time. The crews inside experienced 1,000 years in the span of a heartbeat. When the process ended, the ships reappeared in their original forms, hulls intact, weapons depowered. But the crews were no longer Korvath warriors. They had aged 10 centuries in an instant. Carapaces had crumbled to dust, minds had fractured under the weight of eons compressed into seconds. The few survivors that stumbled out of airlocks were husks, their eyes blank, their voices capable only of a low, keening wail that spoke of horrors beyond language. Minister Horek was found on her flagship's bridge, still alive, her body ancient and withered. She looked at the rescue team with eyes that had seen too much time and spoke a single phrase before her mind collapsed entirely. "They showed me everything." The council chamber fell into absolute stillness as the report streamed in. Grand Executor Malkuth bowed his head. "We have been fools." Valen appeared in the chamber, this time without the dramatic folding of space. He simply was there, standing in the center of the dais, his expression unreadable. "You wanted to know if gods bleed. The answer is irrelevant. What matters is that we protect. We do not conquer, we do not rule, we protect. And we will not permit anything, swarm, empire, or conspiracy, to threaten what we have returned to safeguard." He turned to address the entire assembly. "The swarm arrives in 6 hours. Your defense grids have been purged of the tampering. You will fight alongside us, not because you are worthy, but because you are here. Do not mistake this for forgiveness. Do not test our patience again." The projection faded. Kale, watching from his bridge, felt the cold certainty of a species that had just brushed against extinction and been permitted to survive. The Korvath Ascendancy, the mightiest empire in known space, had become a protectorate in all but name, and the truly terrifying thing was that humanity did not even seem to want it. The swarm was coming, the reckoning was at hand. Part 7. The dark matter swarm entered the galaxy's outer arm as a tide of negative light, a rolling absence that swallowed stars and exhaled gravitational distortions. Every telescope in the Ascendancy tracked its advance, but it was the human construct beneath Earth's oceans that responded first. The interlocking rings accelerated, their impossible geometry generating a harmonic that propagated across the entire defense grid, and the galaxy held its breath. Then humanity revealed itself in full. They came not in ships but as presence. Points of structured light emerged from Earth's lattice, each one a human consciousness fully decoupled from physical form, their identities woven directly into the substrate of reality. They grew as they traveled, drawing energy from the fabric of spacetime itself, until each one was a colossus of radiant geometry, kilometers tall, their shapes suggesting limbs and faces only in the way a nebula might suggest a familiar form. Valen Dre led them. His light form burned a steady gold, and when he spoke, the words resonated through the minds of every living being in the sector. "Korvath forces hold the perimeter. Do not engage directly. This is our fight." The swarm met the human vanguard at the edge of an uninhabited system, and the battle that followed defied every law of warfare the Korvath had ever written. There were no explosions, no kinetic impacts. The humans wove reality like thread, stitching closed the tears the swarm had ripped in spacetime. Where the dark matter constructs tried to consume energy, the humans fed them pure order, structured causality that the swarm could not digest. One by one, the constructs unraveled, their dark mass converting to inert hydrogen that scattered into the void. It was not a battle, it was a correction, a restoration. The Korvath ships hung at the perimeter, their weapons useless, their crews watching in awe and terror. Kale stood on his bridge and understood what Valen had meant about scale. The Ascendancy's thousand-year dominion, its fleets and conquests and proud traditions, was a footnote in a story humanity had been writing since before the first Korvath discovered fire. The swarm's core, a knot of compressed dark matter the size of a gas giant, made a final desperate surge toward the galactic core. 3 human colossi intercepted it. They joined their forms into a single geometric array that Kale's mind could only process as a doorway opening in the middle of nothing, and the swarm's core was pushed through it, not destroyed, but displaced, shunted into a region of subspace where its hunger would spend eternity chasing an ever-receding horizon. Silence returned. The dark matter smear faded from the telescopes. The human colossi shrank back into points of light and streamed toward Earth, their work complete. The entire engagement had lasted 43 minutes. In the aftermath, the Korvath Ascendancy held its first council session without a single war minister present. Grand Executor Malkuth abdicated 3 days later, declaring that an empire born of conquest had no place in a galaxy protected by beings who could unmake reality with a thought. The Ascendancy dissolved into a loose commonwealth of worlds, its fleets repurposed for humanitarian aid, its territories open to self-governance. Kale retired to a small coastal settlement on Korvath Prime, where he spent his remaining years watching the stars and trying to reconcile the warrior he had been with the peace he had been given. Valen visited him once, a year after the swarm's defeat. They sat on a cliff overlooking a violet sea, and Kale asked the question that had haunted him since the battle. Why do you not rule? You have the power to command the entire galaxy. Valen watched the horizon. Power that requires command is fragile. Real strength is the ability to act and then step back. We protect because we can. We do not rule because we do not need to. A child, a young Korvath who had been born after the battle, approached them with the fearless curiosity of the young. "Are you gods?" she asked, her mandibles clicking with wonder. Valen looked at her, and the expression on his human face was something Kale had never seen before, a softness that held no condescension, only warmth. "We're not gods. We're just humans who learn to listen to the universe. It has a lot to say if you pay attention." The child seemed satisfied with the answer and scampered away. Kale and Valen sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the sea, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. Far above, Earth hung in the night sky, visible now as a permanent beacon, its lattice a gentle reminder of the protectors who had returned. And somewhere in the deep listening stations that monitored the spaces between galaxies, a new signal had just been detected, a cry for help from a distant galactic cluster, where another dark swarm was on the move, and another civilization was praying for a miracle. Humanity had already begun to answer.